Ready? You guys ready? Are you ready? I know I am. Let's see if we're ready.
Hi, I'm asking people, who did you explore today on Wall Street?
Kids on the beat, kids on the street, beat kids.
Beat kids.
Excuse me, can
I want that to be my intro. Beat kids. Beat kids. Hello, welcome to another Boobs with Booze. I hope you guys had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I don't like that day. The day's racist. I call it Thanksgiving for a reason. Here's a blanket of smallpox. There you go, suckers. That's what the Pilgrims remind me of. They punked out the Indians. Let's see what's going on in the news today, shall we? Impeachment. All right, we're going to go to our Huffington Post. What is this? The Dems hint impeachment could go beyond Ukraine. No shit, Sherlock. Come on, it's just so easy. So let's take a deep dive. Basically, Devon Nunez has kind of gotten called out. There is a damning detail about the House Intelligence Report. Devon Nunez, the creep from California, the state I reside, was in contact with Rudy Giuliani. So there is a conflict of interest because Devon Nunez, who is not Latin, by the way, basically is the head of the Republican side of the committee. What is this ad? No ads, no ads. No, shut up. All right, let's read, because reading is fundamental. The House Intelligence Committee impeach report released Tuesday includes calling records showing that the committee's own ranking member Devon Nunez of California, by the way, he tried to sue a cow, a whole different story, was privately in contact with key players in President Trump's dealings with Ukraine. Do you guys remember back, I think it was in 2018 or 2017, early on, and I believe Sean Spicer was still the press secretary. And this is around the time when Sean Spicer had dived into the branches. And then Devon Nunez was dropped off at a weird location in the White House. I believe forgive me, it might have been early 2018. This is the start of everything with Devon Nunez. And this is why you would hear from him and the conflict of interest. This is the story. I love when powerful white men go down. The report, which came after several long days of hearing last month, contained phone logs of AT&T that showed Nunez had multiple calls in April with Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and Giuliani's now indicted business associates, Lev Parnas and John Solomon, then a right-wing contributor to The Hill, who helped push the Ukrainian conspiracy, also had calls with Parnas, Giuliani, and at the same time, Nunez was in contact. Ooh. I'm gonna stop right there. That's already enough that I need, though we can dig deeper. Ladies and gentlemen, is this sounding, this is kind of sounding worse than Watergate, and that's way before my time. Like, that was just some tapes, but this is stupid gate. And there's a lot of stupid players here that just, and Giuliani, oh, karma's so sweet, so sweet, oh God. The context occurred after Solomon published a column on April 7th that smeared Marie Yovanovitch, the U.S. ambassador of the Ukraine. Yovanovitch was abruptly removed from her position in May after Trump and conservative media, specifically Solomon, falsely accused her of conspiring with Democrats to influence the 2016 presidential election and release damaging information against Trump. Most of Solomon's sourcing came from Yulia Yuvinsko, a former Ukrainian top prosecutor who originated the lies about Yovanovitch after clashing with her about corruption in his own office. Ooh. This is deep. This is deep. Oh, man. Democracy, you in trouble, girl. All right, let's move on. I was reading something about the HIV AIDS crisis going into rural America. And I just have to say, as a child of the 80s, I was born millennial. I do recall early on and then later how, of course, HIV was the gay plague. And then it became rapid in the Black community. And we were known as a plague. Not as bad as what happened to my homosexual brothers and sisters. But these are the same people that vote Republican, that vote against their interests. And these are the same people that would look, they're the ones that are amongst the opiate crisis. Along with the opiate crisis, what do you get with sharing needles and unprotected sex? Hepatitis, A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z. And now, HIV in rural communities. What's funny is they thought it would never happen to them. People all over the world, if you see something bad going on with one community, never ignore it. Never ignore it because of classism or racism or any of those isms. Because if you don't stop it, then it's going to get to you. So let's talk about these white folks that have gotten HIV. Well, some of these articles are going back to like 2014, 2017. What I don't like is a lot of these things are under wrap in contrast to when we talked about the crack epidemic of the 80s and the 90s. It was just in your face constantly. And that made the Black community look like, still to this day, we're still feeling the trauma of that and the broken families. We told y'all. All right, so this is from the New York Times. HIV is coming to rural America. It's been there. Let's read. While there are still about 1 million people living with HIV in the United States in some of America's largest cities, the news about HIV and AIDS is surprisingly positive in the urban dwellings. New HIV diagnoses fall in a historic lows in New York City, the Department of Health announced on November 22nd of this year, reporting that the largest cities in the United States have fewer diagnoses of HIV in 2018. That during that same year, statistics were kept from in 2001. This was just a few weeks after Philadelphia's Department of Health reported a 14% drop in number of newly diagnosed HIV infections overall. More than 1/3 of Black men who have sex with men, and especially vulnerable population. San Francisco, which is where I live, Chicago, which I used to live, have also seen the rates of new HIV infections falling. Ooh, but while robust municipal health campaigns are creating downward HIV trends in America's largest cities, in rural America, it is an opposite trend that is emerging. You think? There have been, of course, always cases of HIV sparsely through parts of the country, but these places of the cities, the conditions that led to HIV transmission are now intensified in rural America. Okay. This is nothing new to me. The reason why it's nothing new to me, Springfield, Missouri, that's where I grew up. I left when I was 13 back in the mid-90s. And that was during meth. They would call it crank or crystal. Crank, I realized it was the same thing. Hepatitis was a thing that was going on, I do recall. And I had some friends that I would hang around with when I moved to St. Louis that had hepatitis of sharing needles, or, they were doing meth. And then Oxycontin came in, which I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, because I graduated in the early 2000s in high school. So the growing, the precautions should have been much sooner, but let's go. Let's go to West Virginia, Appalachia. The crisis has already arrived. A cluster of 80 new HIV infections have been diagnosed since early year in Campbell County. Tony Young, an AIDS activist, puts the epidemic of opioid addiction, fueling by drug companies, promotion of pain medications beginning in the 1990s. Told you. In a crisis of rural regions, in part because these regions are completely unprepared to deal with the magnitude of the problem. And most of those regions now, like you have West Virginia, Indiana caught a case of HIV. I was still living in Chicago, and Indiana was a fellow, of course, is our fellow neighboring state. In 2012, 2011, 2012, when Mike Pence was governor of Indiana, there was a hepatitis outbreak. And then along with that hepatitis outbreak, a year later there was an HIV outbreak going on in a lot of these smaller towns in Indiana. So this is 7 years ago before I even moved to California. So this is an issue already on the table. And then what I just talked about with the whole methamphetamine and people sharing needles with the hepatitis going back to the 90s. And then them switching over to opioid. This is everything. I'm smart and I've been around. And some of the party people I used to hang around with were some of these dangerous people. You live, you learn, and you get out and you're safe. I've never been into heroin and all that. Never been into pills. Ecstasy, weed. But I'll continue. Miss Young founded that is what now the Community Education Group in DC in 1993, originally to address HIV and AIDS to women. An African-American lesbian, she has spent most of her 30 years working to help members of the Black and gay and urban communities that it affects. But since her recent move to Virginia, this is a Black woman, near the Appalachia coalfields, she has seen the crisis take a different shape. Unlike, why are we always saving people? We always saving people. Unlike urban areas that have dealt with similar health and substance crises in the past, and that have networks of service providers and consumers in place, small rural health jurisdictions often lack infrastructure to confront the crisis that have a little history dealing with comparable health issues, she explained. Yeah. we're going to go to chapter 2 after this. We'll be right back.